my name is Giorgio Rod, and the book I chose for my book report was Pearl at End House by Agatha Christie. It is a murder mystery novel with Hercule Poirot as a detective. It is a story of a woman, Nick, who has survived 3 accidental brushes with death. In the book, there is a greatly misleading murder of Nick's cousin and many shady and suspicious characters that are being questioned. It interests readers that like to read about detective mystery fiction, and the plot is very enticing, solid, and suspenseful between the investigation conducted by Poirot and the continued suspicion placed on all the characters throughout the novel. And again, for people who like to read about detective mystery fiction, this is a story for you. But this story is very simple to understand, and most of what is put forth is very straightforward. It is a very suspenseful book until the end, and it's full of deception, especially by one character, as you'll find out. The characters in this book include Hercule Poirot, a famous private detective, a former police officer, and he will be the one investigating Nick Buckley's case. Then we have Captain Arthur Hastings, married to Bella Hastings. He's a former Army captain. The story is told from his perspective, and him and Poirot are staying at a resort in the city of St. Lou on the Cornish coast of South England. Then we have Magdala Buckley. Everyone calls her Nick. She's the owner of End House and has been there for 6 months. Apparently, she has had accidental brushes with death, and Poirot offers to help her. She's engaged to Michael Seaton and keeps it a secret until she finally confessed to Poirot. Then we have George. He's nicknamed Commander Challenger. He's a sailor and also Nick's friend. He has a soft spot for her and wants to marry her, and he lives in a nearby town. Then we have Charles Weiss. He's Nick's cousin. He's a lawyer, and he gets End House if Nick dies as stated in her will. Then we have Frederica Rice. Her nickname is Freddie. She's Nick's best friend and gets the rest of Nick's estate. She's an abused wife and has a lover. His name is Jim Lazarus, and they both get married at the end. Then we have Jim Lazarus. He's an art dealer in love with Freddie, and he's also very wealthy. We have Mr. and Mrs. Croft. They are known forgers, as you will find out. They are Nick's Australian neighbors. They helped Nick make her will. Of course, they are very lively people, as you will see. They lease a lodge near End House, and they arranged a mortgage for Nick and pay the rent on her house. Then we have Ellen, Nick's housekeeper. She has a husband and a child. After that, we have Michael Seaton. He invented an amphibian machine called Albatross. Apparently, he is Nick's secret fiancé, and their relationship is kept a secret. He inherits a lot of his wealth from his uncle and is very dependent on him. He has a will, and in that will it states that he leaves all of his money to his fiancé. In the book, they find out that he drowned far away in the Pacific, and his uncle also died before as well. His name is Matthew Seaton. Then we have Maggie Buckley. She is one of Nick's Yorkshire cousins. Dr. McAllister, he is George's uncle. Dr. Graham, he is Nick's doctor. Inspector Yap, he is Hercule Poirot's police inspector friend. Then we have Mr. Whitfield, and he is a law firm head and Matthew's lawyer as well. We start off at the Majestic Hotel, the biggest hotel in St. Lou. That is where Hastings and Poirot are staying. So what starts us off is they are sitting on one of the terraces of the Majestic Hotel. Then into the garden, a girl, Nick Buckley, starts hurrying in at them. Poirot stumbled and fell, and the girl and Hastings helped him to his feet. Then Poirot thanked her by buying her a cocktail. They conversed a little, and she said that she lived at a place called End House. It's a tumble-down old place. She lives there alone, and it had been running down the family line for 200 to 300 years, and she's the last of her family after her brother died a few years back. She had mentioned that she had escaped from death, and then a wasp flew by her head, or at least they thought it was a wasp. And with those accidental brushes with death, she had mentioned that the first one was on a Cornish hillside. As she was going down, the brakes on her car failed. Then on a coastal path, a falling boulder missed her by inches. And then an oil painting fell and almost crushed her in bed. And a man appeared. His name was George. And him and Nick went to find Freddie and Jim Lazarus, Nick's 2 close friends. And Poirot had noticed that she left her hat behind. so he picked it up and noticed a small hole in the brim of the hat. Poirot became interested and thought that someone was trying to kill her, and he wanted to go to End House to get in touch with Nick. Poirot and Hastings then gave the hat to Mrs. Buckley at a lunch where Jim, Freddie, and George were all present, and Hastings made arrangements during the meal and that they would go to End House at 6:30. They pondered the idea of someone trying to shoot her at a hotel garden. The garden is deserted and there is plenty of cover, and anyone could hide themselves comfortably or unobserved. At 6:30, they went to End House, introduced themselves, and told her that she was in danger. She doesn't quite believe them and says it's silly, although someone could have arranged 3 brushes with death. It is very unlikely, though. They told her that someone shot her with a Mauser pistol, based on the bullet hole and the bullet that they found on the ground. She said that she had one, but when she went to look in her drawer, it was gone. After that, she states that her nearest relation is Charles Weiss, and talks about Mr. and Mrs. Croft. And she also says that she made a will 6 months ago before her operation, and she said that the End House would go to Charles, and the rest of what she had would go to Freddie. They told her to be careful, and that in a few days the truth will be discovered. As you can see, Poirot is very confident in his abilities of being a detective and thinks he can find out what happens in a few days' time. As I said before, Poirot is very well known. His name was on the newspaper, and what him and Hastings want to try to do is try to make it difficult for the assassin to get to her, but they can't watch over her day and night, so that's a recurring problem that you'll see throughout the book. He also thinks that since he arrived in the neighborhood, that it is not a coincidence that this is happening. And then there's the idea that comes up that maybe Nick is hiding something, but he quickly shrugs off that idea. That evening, it was dancing evening at the hotel. George danced with Nick and Freddie with Jim. Poirot and Hastings told Rice while she was alone at the table that someone was out to kill Nick. She was very shocked at that fact and wondered why someone would want to kill her, but they told her to watch over her. Then on the next day, which was Sunday, they snuck into End House after Jim, Freddie, and Nick had left to look in Nick's room and investigate. Then they ran into Mr. Croft, and he recognized Poirot from the newspaper, and he had told Croft that he had Nick's permission and that he needed to measure the amount of chain that would be needed so that the picture that fell on Nick's head does not fall again. Then he invited them to his home for a cup of tea. Mrs. Croft was introduced, and Poirot talked about his travels and a train accident that injured his wife and gave her a spine injury. After they had left, Poirot said that they seemed like nice people, but he said they were suspicious, as he's suspicious of everyone, and he said they're just too typical. The next morning, Poirot ordered Mrs. Buckley to show up, and they had talked about someone staying with her so that nothing else would happen to Nick, no accidental brushes with death, and that she would stay safe. And so she said that she would invite her Yorkshire cousin, Maggie, and that she would arrive at 5:30. Poirot, Hastings, and Nick were in the sitting room of the hotel, and that's where they were talking. And Nick was very afraid, but Poirot thought that there was something that Nick was hiding from them. Nick then said that she would never consider selling End House because she was very fond of it, unless it was a ridiculously good offer. Nick then invited Poirot and Hastings to dinner at 8 and fireworks at 9:30 in the garden outside of End House. Poirot and Hastings then met with Mr. Charles Weiss at his office building, and they asked about his cousin Nick and if she would consider putting End House on the market, and he said no. Then Hastings and Poirot asked why he was out on Saturday morning at 12:30, and he just said that he had left early for no apparent reason. After they talked to him, they said he was a negative person and gave a very negative impression on them, and they wondered why he was not in his office at 12:30 on Saturday morning. That evening, Poirot and Hastings arrived in End House. They were introduced to Maggie by Nick, and they told her about a secret assassin. Maggie found it hard to believe and says that Nick does not have an enemy in the world and that she is very fond of her. And dinner began. Freddie, Jim, Maggie, Nick, Poirot, and Hastings were there. All of them except George. He didn't show up because he had to go back to Plymouth the night before, and they said that he should show up later. During dinner, Jim mentioned that Michael Seaton died a week ago and that he was very wealthy, but Nick said that she still believes that he is alive and that her and Freddie met him in Scarborough last year and that he was a great person. After that, they went to the garden that overlooked the sea and harbor, and then dozens of people arrived and Nick greeted all of them. Then, while they were outside, Maggie and Freddie said that they were cold and they would go in to get a coat for themselves. But Nick insisted that she would go in to get their coats because she was also cold and needed a coat because her shawl wasn't enough because of the wind. So Maggie and Nick then went in to get a coat. She put the shawl on the sofa, and then Nick went upstairs to put her coat on. Maggie called out and said that she couldn't find the coat and that it must have been in her car. Nick said that she would bring down something of hers, and she said that it didn't matter and took Nick's shawl if she didn't want it. She said it would be enough and that she just wanted something. And then after that, Nick said that she would be out in a minute. Then while they were outside, Poirot wanted to get a coat for him and Hastings, and right before he went, him and Hastings saw Maggie dead with a shawl on her, 100 yards in front of the house. Poirot was shocked that he let this happen. Nick walked out of the house and saw Maggie dead on the ground. She was devastated, and she asked, "Why couldn't it have been me?" Hastings then took Nick into the house and tried to comfort her, and he called the police on Poirot's order. And Ellen mentioned Dr. Graham, so Hastings also told him to come. And again, he kept trying to comfort her. And after that, the police came, the doctor came, and she told them the story of what happened. After that, Poirot and Graham said that she would not stay there and instead go to a nursing home. She said that she's not afraid anymore and that anyone can murder her and she wouldn't care anymore because she was devastated about Maggie's death. Then George rushed in thinking that Nick was dead and wanted to know what was going on. Poirot explained that Maggie died and they were taking Nick to the doctor's car so that he could give her something to ensure a good night's rest. Again, Poirot was shocked and could not believe that he let the death happen, but he found some courage and said that he would start again and not fail this time. The original task was to ensure the safety of Nick, which they are still doing, but their new task is to hunt down the murderer. They think it is someone in her inner circle. They question the people at the garden that are watching the fireworks, and they agree that Nick's own pistol was taken for one reason, to give her death the appearance of suicide. Then they questioned Ellen because she acted like it was not a surprise to her and said that their strongest suspect was Charles Weiss because he would end up getting end house, but there's nothing of value to really inherit. But they come up with some motives. There's gain, jealousy, fear, and then there's hate or love that turned into hate as well. And then Poirot wrote a list of people surrounding Nick, and in it were suspicions and motives, and they think that Charles, of course, is the most likely suspect because he has the best opportunities and two motives, including slight guilt or love and hate of his temperament. Then Poirot had said that he had saw a huge psychological change in Nick since dinner because she did not wish to die. Then all of a sudden she did. Yes, it could have obviously been because of her cousin's death, but maybe the change was before that. And then after dinner, Nick was on the telephone for a while, 20 minutes or more, and they want to know who spoke to her, what they said, or if she really telephoned anyone. And Poirot thinks that they would find a clue in these answers. Freddie then went to talk to Poirot and Hastings in the sitting room, and she confessed that she was not at Tavistock the other day, and that she had not just come, and that she had come last week with Jim, and they had stayed at a little place called Shellicombe, and that they had met 6 months ago. After that, George came into the sitting room asking why Nick, who was at the nursing home, was not allowed to see anyone, and then Poirot assured him that it was for Nick's safety and that they would be the only ones that would be let in. Poirot, before going to see Nick, said that he knew the answer during breakfast and told Hastings that Nick would tell him. Then they went to the nursing home on a high hill overlooking the bay and talked to Nick. She then confessed that Michael Seaton and her had been engaged, but at dinner she did not want to admit it. She made an excuse about the telephone and that she wanted to hear the news alone, and that's why she wore a black dress because she was worried, and then had just received the news that he had drowned far away in the Pacific, and that's why she thought she had nothing to live for and was sleeping badly lately. She said she met him a year ago at La Toquette in September, and they got engaged in December, but they had to keep it a secret for the reason that Michael's uncle was giving all the wealth to Michael, and he was really dependent on him, and Michael's uncle really hated women, and he thought they ruined a man's life, so they had to keep it a secret from him, or else he wouldn't get that wealth anymore. And his uncle financed the building of Albatross and paid for the expenses of the round world flight, which is what he died in. And if Michael pulled it off, then he could have asked for anything. She kept her word, but did not think it had anything to do with the mysterious attacks on her. Michael's uncle, as I said before, died a week ago, but she did not say anything because it wouldn't have been a nice way of saying it, and Michael would have hated it as well. After that, Porter and Hastings asked about Charles, and she said he means well but disapproves of her. They told Nick to remain there and obey her orders, and she agreed and said she didn't want to see anyone anyways, and then she gave them permission to search for her will at End House. Porter says that the motive is money, and that the will that Michael made before the start of the flight says that he left all he had to his fiancée. They talked about Michael being a millionaire, one of the richest men in England, and Porter thinks that his list has narrowed down to two people, Freddie and Charles, and apart from End House, everything was to go to her. If Nick had died last night instead of Maggie, then Freddie would be a rich woman. Charles would inherit the house, as I said before, and Porter does not think that he made Nick's will for her. Porter is still keeping an open mind, although those two are indicated. And they went back to the house to greet Ellen, and she asked if she was surprised if Maggie had been shot. She said yes, and she said that she was very surprised. She said she was at the house as a kitchen maid as a little girl, and that the house was good, but not anymore. She said she did not hear the shots fired, and she heard Nick go upstairs and Miss Buckley call, and she did not go out to watch the fireworks because she had to clean up for dinner and go to bed because her and her husband, William, got to go out tomorrow and were given the day off. And then Porter had asked if there were any secret chambers anywhere in the house, and she said there was a small sliding panel, and she doesn't remember where it was, and that was the gospel truth. Porter and Hastings clearly think that Ellen is a suspect now and is the last person on her list. Then they found letters from Freddie from last February, and it's clear that she's taking drugs, and it was about a party. Then they found a packet of love letters from Michael to Magdala, and Hastings did not think that it was right to look through them, but they did anyways and concluded that Michael's having made a will in favor of Nick is actually recorded in writing. And they told Ellen about the engagement, and she had no idea and said that she would never have thought that that would happen. After that, they went back to the nursing home, and Nick still can't remember where she had put the will and said that she's very unorganized. After that, they told Nick about the secret panel. She said she'd never been told about that, and they had said that Mr. Croft helped Nick make her own will, and then she had suddenly remembered that she mailed the will to Charles with help of Mr. Croft, and they went to Charles with Nick's permission. They asked him about the will, and he said he never received one. Then they went to Mr. Croft and asked him, and he said they had sent it to Charles so he could draw out a proper one. And so one of the two was lying, but Porter doesn't see any reason why Mr. Croft is lying, and it would be no advantage to him. Then Colonel Weston called him up after having lunch, and he gave them a torn scrap of paper that he found when the police were searching the grounds not far from where the fireworks were being watched, and it said, "Must have money at once, if not you, ... What will happen? I'm warning you." And they thought this could be a clue, a hint of blackmail. Maybe someone from the party was being pressed for money. And the handwriting reminds him of Rice's note, but said that it couldn't be her handwriting. Then George came in, and they told him the rumors that Nick was engaged to Michael Seaton. He said that he knew Nick was engaged to someone because she told him a couple of days ago, but gave no clues of who it could be. Then after that, Porter and Hastings went to London to meet with some people. Mr. Whitfield said that he was Captain Seaton's legal advisor and to all the Seaton family as well, and his firm made Seaton's will and left a very large fortune to Michael, and that he had no other relations. And Captain Seaton made a will before leaving England. He was dependent on the allowance he received from his uncle, Matthew, and he left everything to his wife, Miss Magdala Buckley. And if she died, it would go to whoever she named in her will. And then they met with Inspector Yap. They talked about George's uncle, Dr. McAllister, and that he got caught up since they were last saw each other, both Hastings and Porritt. And the next morning, they went back to St. Louis and went to the nursing home. And they had found out that Nick was dangerously ill from cocaine-filled chocolates. Porritt was completely astounded, and he said, "Why did he go?" Because the number one thing they wanted was for her protection, and something happened while they were gone. Dr. Graham, who was also there, said she would be fine. Porritt told her to eat nothing from outsiders before, but Nick said and proved that it said with the compliments of Hercule Poirot in his perfect handwriting, yet Porritt didn't do it. And Porritt was ashamed. He lost a lot of confidence, and he was so confused on what happened and couldn't believe it at all. Then he went to speak to a person that works in the nursing home, who brought the box from a man who gave it to him into the door and put it on the table. And the guy who was described seemed like Jim. He said that he took it from him, set it on the table, and that there was also another box of chocolates on there as well. And that one did not have a name on it. Jim then said that Freddie asked him to bring the chocolates, but Freddie said she did not know that they were poison and that the box they bring was the other box. And also that Nick asked her to bring them and that they were full of cocaine, but she had only eaten one, so it wasn't too bad. And then the next day, in the morning, Porritt got a call from Charles saying he received the will, and it was dated February 25th. They had wondered if he had actually just received it or if he had had it all along. And Porritt said that if Nick was supposed to be dead, we should have developments. And sure enough, here they are. And they had also stated that Charles had said nothing about the contents of the will. Porritt was trying to puzzle and arrange his ideas together. Porritt remembers that Nick said that she wanted to stage a play at End House, and he said tonight that they would do that, and it would be produced by him, and Nick would have a part to play in it. Porritt said they would produce a comedy and reveal the truth of the situation. Then he said there's much to do. He hurried from the room. That night, it was 9 o'clock, and there was a curious gathering at End House. Every person from Porritt's list was present: Ellen, her husband, their child, Charles, Lazarus, George, Freddie, and then Mr. and Mrs. Croft. Charles was apparently in charge of the proceedings and told everyone that his cousin Nick was dead, when obviously she was not, as you guys will find out. It was Porritt's special wish that Charles would read the will, and the will said that everything would go to Mr. and Mrs. Croft. And then everyone was dumbfounded. Apparently Nick wanted the Crofts to come and live with them, but they didn't. And Mrs. Croft said that there was a secret that she would never tell. Then Mr. Croft said it was a surprise and Nick did not tell him what she was doing. Then, seated around the table, they all made a seance. The lights were turned off, and they sat in silence. And then all of a sudden, coming out of the doorway, they thought it was Nick's ghost. But Nick wasn't actually dead. They had portrayed it like that so that the truth would appear, and that's eventually what would happen. Nick knew that the will was false, and the Crofts had forged it. They are known forgers, and they were exposed. That fact in itself was one of the huge truths found out from Nick's appearance at End House. Porritt then says that they had forged the will and sent it to Charles after they heard the news of Nick's death so that they can inherit all the money that they thought she had or had been given to her by her dad. Then Yap entered the room and reveals that they are known forgers. And Nick says that she left Charles the End House and everything else to Freddie. Just then, someone outside the window shoots at Freddie and barely hit her. She was fine, and there was just a little blood, as the bullet only grazed her shoulder. Freddie said that the man was her husband, and Freddie's husband, who was sick and dying, was captured by Porritt. he had wrote many notes begging her for money, and he threatened her, a kind of blackmail, and if she did not give him money, he would threaten to shoot himself. Then he threatened to shoot her. But Poirot does not think it was Freddy's husband who shot Maggie. Nick wanted to hush it up and not make it all public because it wouldn't bring Maggie's life back, and said that it would bring a lot of suffering and terrible publicity on Freddy, and said she did not deserve it. Poirot then agreed with Nick, saying she was completely right. He did not know who Jay was until that night, and had known there was such a person. But he realized he made a grave error, an omission. He added another letter to this list, the letter K. He said it was the person K who shot Maggie. He said in the early evening he concealed himself behind the curtains in the drawing room while everyone was in the dining room. He saw a person enter the drawing room and go to the fireplace and open a small wooden panel and take a pistol out of it. The person then left the room while he was still observing the person and went to the coat rack in the hall where all the visitors left their coats and wraps. The person then wiped the pistol with a handkerchief and put it in Mrs. Rice's gray wrap. So the real question is, what do you think happens next? Who could the killer be, and who was the person in the house earlier that evening that Poirot oversaw? Read the book to find out. Deception is the central theme in the book. This book is filled with plenty of deception scattered throughout. The whole story, as Poirot and Hastings see it, is orchestrated by one very unexpected character, specifically to deceive. The way this character deceives completely changes the entire outlook on the story, and it is completely shocking to figure out who the murderer is at the end. In this story, a certain character who is not the murderer believes that one should keep one's feelings to oneself and not burden others with them, an attitude she expresses shortly before the turn of an unexpected and sorrowful event that takes place. That event was full of utter hatred and disgrace. By keeping those feelings inside, the whole deceiving and ingenious plan is able to take place. This is only one of the reasons that the plan is able to take place. There is also deception about the murder, knowing where the secret panel was at End House that Ellen was telling Poirot and Hastings about. There is also deception when George supplied cocaine to both Freddy and Nick concealed in wristwatches, which someone used to poison the chocolates and to overdose to escape the gallows. Deception also takes place when Mr. and Mrs. Croft forged Nick's will and sent it to Charles when they heard of quote-unquote Nick's death, just so they could get all of Nick's money that they thought she had or had gotten from her father. They played it off as a surprise and that they had no idea that they were in Nick's will, but they were found out by Poirot and Inspector Happ and were arrested. In conclusion, Perilla End House by Agatha Christie is an amazingly written novel that I would recommend to any readers that like to read about detective mystery fiction. I hope you all enjoyed my review and choose to read this book sometime in the near future.